1 second here. Sorry, you 2 people. This is what happens when you are trying to multi yeah, hi person. This is just I'm just there we go. There's Switch going. Okay, hi everybody. I'm back again. And I spent about a good 20 seconds. Okay, I don't know. Maybe it reset itself. I'm not really sure what happened there. But there was like a glitch with the stream. I was trying to like exit out of it. It looked going. I'm not sure. Sorry about the confusion there. Um, for those of you just tuning in, I am currently reading my dad's manuscript. Now I'm reading the story, Deputy's Gifts. That's the working title that I'm using. I think it's a different title. I really have to look at that and double check. But that's what I'm going with right now is Deputy's Gifts. And yeah, I am because it's Friday. I figured, I'm just gonna read a little extra. So I wanted to, and so that basically what it is, pardon me. I'll be reading a lot tonight, and then next week I'm going to read through again, and then the next Friday it'll be the end of the series because I'm doing 2 chapters a night, and then the wrap up will be at the end of next week, and then I'm going to take a break because I have stuff happening, so much stuff happening, just some hiccups with stuff, um, but that's neither here nor there. Neither here nor there. Um, so I'm planning on doing extra readings tonight. Normally I do 2 a night, but tonight I was going to do 6 chapters, which sounds like a lot, and normally would not be a lot because most of the chapters have been 1 or 2 chapters. Of course, the ones I've picked, I think there's 3 of them that are like between 5 to 8 chapters. So it's a little beefy today. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm not going to spend too long, aside from poor people on YouTube wondering what's going on. Anyway, so I'm going to get into it and I'm going to start reading. And as I read, I'm going to be marking up editing. So if you see down, might be down anyway, but I'm going to try and connect with you because that's my goal is to try and connect. And I've been head downing too much and not enough. Hi, everybody. And not enough engagement, as it were. To 13. So, grab a coffee, grab a tea, something relaxing, get all cozy, and I'm going to start reading now. Fall wore slowly on. Ethan spent much time alone or oh, wait, alone or in company, attempting to track the bandits. He eventually became sure that the bandits had their hole in the wild country on the edge of the hills, where no man goes, a land full of hiding places. He talked to his 2 assistants about trying to search them out, but they were not encouraging. It would take an army to search them out of their deputy, declared Tywell. That be that is some of the wildest country in the realm. Glass nodded. For the 3 of us to find them, they would need either all the luck in the world or someone with us who knows the way. They were not always unsuccessful. Once he and Tywell and Glass found abandoned sorry, they weren't always unsuccessful. Once he, Tywell, and Glass found a band in the midst of attacking a farmstead. Farmers out east of the town had reported armed men riding here and there, lost stock, and even once or twice farmsteads attacked. 3 of them had gone riding out that way in hope of finding some sign themselves. Most to be desired most to be de- most to be desired would be fresh tracks which they could follow. from over the hill before they saw anything, and the deputy led them at a run along the path. Ethan took the situation at a glance. A stocky, grizzled farmer with a ready in the doorway of his house, swinging an old axe, which he clearly knew well how to use. In a semicircle around him were the bandits, 10 of them, leaping in to strike when they saw an opening, leaping back out to avoid his blows. As he fought, the armor the, the farmer kept up a steady flow of curses sufficient to blister all by all nearby ears. But the battle would not go on much longer. One or two of the bandits had blows, and in a short time they would begin to use bow bows. Leaping in to strike. Ethan motioned with his hands to bring the two young men up beside him and drew his sword. Fast as we can, into the rear of them. Make the first blow count. Without another word, he was away, not waiting to see if they followed. The distance they had to cover was sufficient that the bandits heard them before they arrived, and some of them turned. Ethan directed Priyan toward toward a tall, lanky fellow in roughly patched scale armor, one who seemed a little more dangerous than the others. The lanky bandit brought up a short spear, presenting its point toward the deputy's horse. Ethan swerved Priyan slightly to the left and struck with his sword as he went by. The bandit fell. Hauling his horse round in a tight circle, Ethan made for another bandit, noting as the two young men with him each got a good stroke in. Will killing his man outright, Glass giving his a severe wound. The fight did not go on much past that point. It was one thing to fight a lone and outnumbered farmer. It was quite another to face mounted men with bright swords and determination. The living bandits scattered for nearby trees, with Will and Glass in pursuit, screaming like fiends. Ethan hesitated a moment, then rode after them. In under those trees, a mounted man might find himself at a disadvantage against a man on foot. He caught Glass quite quickly, grasping the bridle of his horse and moving quickly to dodge a clumsy blow of the young man's sword. When Glass saw who it was, he regained his wits quickly. "Stay out of the trees!" Ethan shouted at him. "Too dangerous." Without waiting to see if Glass obeyed, the deputy rode after Will, who was already going into the trees. Fortunately, he had a near brush with a low branch, which brought him to his senses. He turned and was coming out of the wood just as Ethan arrived. They rode back to the farmer, who greeted and thanked them warmly for their help. "I'll be getting myself a couple of good dogs after this. Too many bandits about." It might be well of thinking a place to live in town and coming out from there to work in the fields. The man nodded soberly. "It might indeed. Deputy, can you not get troops of the king to be rid of these once and for all?" Ethan shrugged. "Perhaps after the inner provinces of the kingdom are settled, there will be time for us. For the present, it is left for me and those who will help me to do what we can to keep order." There were other cases as well. Men who had attempted to return to the land sometimes found it was easier said than done. Some turned to thievery to help them to live until harvest. In general, though, the, these were worse thieves than they were farmers, and most thought twice after Ethan proved quite able to track down the first three. These circumstances heartened the local moneylender, whose businesses increased with the rigors of the year. But Ethan was becoming concerned about the bandits, especially the group led by the bald man known as Moel. One day, for instance, a trader came through the town and reported that he had been attacked. The trader, a squat, broad, bow-legged fellow, name of Bassacor, was quite indignant when he talked to the deputy. There I be, a travelling along the roads, when out of the bushes they comes, upward o' 3 dozen, led by a big bald man, a roaring and a shouting at them to get a lot of us. Oh, and they'd done it too. Some of those arrows that his fellows were shooting hits a pair of my best mules, lays 'em dead on the road, and the bandits stopped to strip them. Bad, much less profitable. And this be not the first time I be having meetings with this fellow. Once, not so many months back, he and 5 others tries to frighten the mules into a scattering, so as to pick 'em up later on. But I were a riding with a strung bow, and I puts an arrow through the arm o' one of the ruffians, and they decides to think on it again. Then, it be about a month ago, a dozen or so of them attacks a dog with me. He smells them a comin' and warns us. It's an attack, but seeing us ready, their hearts bein' in it. But I hears one of them, what do we now? Oh, well, I figures that's got to be the name of their leader. Bassacor paused, then stabbed a horny old finger into the deputy's chest several times to emphasize the point he was saying. Each time I meet some deputy, each time he has more men with him. Do this go on, he'll be a raising an army and making himself great around. You, deputy, you best be a seeing to this bald man sometime soon. Ethan, whose thoughts had been somewhat the same, could only smile and say, agreed, Bassacor. This bald man must be dealt with, but it is a matter of finding him. He knows, I think, that I seek him, and he avoids the roads when I am out. He and his have made their lair in the wild country, and have not yet been able to track him down. But rest assured, Bassacor, that I intend to do more than simply waiting about until Moel blunders into my hands. But remember also that I am only one man, and one man cannot be everywhere at once. Bassacor was not satisfied. Deputy, an honest trader, bean't able to be making an honest living so long as the road bean't safe. That be your job, boy. And what be you a doing about it? Nothing. It ain't being right, boy. You wanting to be a man might think you don't want to wanting these bandits caught. Ethan took a deep breath. How much would a deputy be if he allowed anyone to question his honesty? Think on your words, Bassacor, and see if some of them might not be a little extreme. Bassacor looked into the deputy's eyes and suddenly shivered a little. My apologies, deputy. My tongue be sometimes a running on ahead of my good sense. Those be foolish words, and I take 'em back. Let there be no hard feelings between us. No hard feelings, Bassacor. I can understand your worry. With bandits being making travel unsafe, but I do what I can. Of course you do, boy. Come, as proof of my goodwill, let me buy you a cup of the best ale this town affords. Ethan smiled and permitted himself to be led to the inn. There came a day when Ethan wearied of constant riding out to look for wrongdoers, and determined to visit Duna's farm. When he came up over the hill into calling distance, he hailed the house. Duna came out, looking up at the hillside, and waved him in with a smile. You come in good time, deputy. If it's hard work you're looking for, it It's time to be building bigger byre for the cows. With two of them in calf, so I've got some neighbors coming over to raise a new one, of course. If you prefer not to work, you could go off deputying, but you'll surely miss out on the food, and I can promise you that the neighbor ladies can make a meal that be no shame to the table of the king himself. Deputying has deputying has been singularly unrewarding this last week. I'd much rather raise a byre, and if there's a promise of food as well, I'd like to raise the byre myself. Lankeseg was still shy and quiet in front of the deputy, but Janice found Ethan familiar enough to be curious about him, what he did, where he lived, and so on. Deputy answered all his questions willingly, until Duna shooed the boy away so that he himself could have a chance to talk to Ethan and introduce him to the neighbors who were beginning to arrive. The neighbors included a small number of women and even more numerous children. Some of these were known to Janice, and very soon there were games of tag and all sorts of amusement up and down the hillside. The raising of the byre was indeed hard work. Duna had gotten the logs together in a number of trips to the wood on a number of different days. It was now a matter of trimming them to fit, notching them at the ends, putting them in their places, and pegging them together with wooden pegs. It was accomplished with a good deal of joking, some singing of good work songs at the lifting portions, great humor, and much sweat. The meal was substantial and very good, and the preparations were underway for the evening meal. Mere glimpses and whiffs of scent were a wonderful promise and inducement for the work to come. By the time the dusk was full, the men were quite hungry and ready to eat whatever was offered. What was offered was food of the best and excellently cooked. Nor was that the end of it. After the food had been eaten, one of the women, by the name of Gwen Plovin, washed out the large cauldron and brought it to her husband at her door. The man stretched a piece of hide across the mouth of the cauldron, tying it with a leather cord, tugging the edges of the hide to make it taut. While this was happening, another man, Tabor by name, was running up and down the scales on a flute made of a sheep's leg bone. A few others had other instruments, even if it was only a pair of wooden spoons held between the fingers. A good bourdor soon began thumping out a tune. The bellowr joined in with the flute, and some of the others joined in as well, rapping on the edges of chairs or stools. Some of the men and their wives began to dance, joined later by some of the young unmarried men and women. Parents of such couples smiled at each other knowingly. The dances were generally vigorous, and occasionally rest periods were required. During such rest periods, some of the men stood to sing or recite songs and tales of the heroes. Some of the women sang also, mostly songs of the lovers of the time of the heroes. At one time in the evening, Lankeseg got up with a good deal of urging and sang the song of the White Dancer. I don't know the tune, so I'm just going to say it. "3 days sat Lothan by this fair, danced lightly in the evening breeze. Oh, she danced light and she danced long, and Lothan scarce believed the sight. So fair her form, and her dance beneath the dazzling light. At last he cried out to her, "Fair dancer, come and rest awhile." And so she turned and looked at him, and he was lost in her fair smile. "Beware," she said, "beware, beware. I seek a man for war and strife. If you permit our lips to meet, you may be granting me your life. I am no man of timid heart, such a task, such a risk I would freely take." And he kissed her on the lips, and so her service he did take. She took him to lands far away, through strife and danger at her side, and yet she gave him joy and love. To do service was his pride. To do her service in elven lands, they sit on thrones of white and gold, in high halls of lordly folk. Young Lothan's tale is ever told, and many winters passed the world, and spring summer passed between. But far gone from that far gone day to this, no more was behold the young Lothan seen. He was, so that was the song. It was not sung, because I don't know the tune. This is also how I know this is a rough draft. Scene break after the song. It was nigh unto midnight before Ethan took his leave. Chapter 8. Chapter 9. He rode back up the hillside. At the top of it, he paused to look back at Duna's farm, and the hills were barely visible in the moonlight. He wondered what Gael might be doing. He heard behind him the sound of little bells and turned. There she was on her horse, watching him with a smile. He rode nearer, curious, but before he could speak, she said, "This is not the first time I've been here. You've made Duna's farm so interesting that I just see a man striving to make his living from a little patch of land. And when I saw you taking your leave, I decided to wait for you, that we might speak again. Did you not say that it was?" "Yes, perhaps. But there comes a time when life lived within the bounds of the hills becomes so wearing that one would do almost anything to escape, if only for a few moments." He nodded. "Though I do not live in the hills, I can understand that. Yes, I would like to go down to the farm and speak to Duna, but I fear it is out of the question." Ethan smiled slightly at the thought. "Yes, I fear he would be so upset at your coming that your welcome would not be as you deserve. Men fear the things of which they know nothing." "Just so. And how goes life with you, Ethan?" "Not well, and not badly." He told her of the attempts to curb the bandits, and of the difficulties in that, and of the doings that day at Duna's farm. At last he stopped, and thought a moment. "I often wish that I could be dead." "And why do you not?" He paused a while before he spoke. "Mostly because the bandits must be curbed before any farm would be safe. There is a task to be done, and I have to do it." He nodded. For a little while longer they talked of various things, until at last Gael declared it was time for her to leave. "I've been out in the plain very long, and it is foolish to court danger." So they parted, and it was not until some minutes later that Ethan found himself wishing he had asked whether he would see her again. Chapter 10. The inn at Alpha Breus had been re-established soon after people began to return to the town, and it had flourished. It was called the House of the Green Dragon, and after After a year of operation, the landlord found one who could signs and the man had done a magnificent sign. It was painted on a large board and portrayed a large dragon, rampant, green scales all over, save for the underbelly, which was white. The drake's mouth was wide, showing a forked, sinuous tongue, and emitting a stream of fire. Okay. The House of the Green Dragon was popular in the evenings, especially on those evenings when merchant trains were passing through. On such evenings, folk would hear to doings of far places. Sorry, just bear with me here. On the second night after Duna's buyer phrasing, a merchant train stopping in the town was stopping in the town, and they were gathering at the House of the Green Dragon. In the course of the evening, Masanakor, Masanakor, the merchant with the largest share in the train, grew somewhat tipsy and a little too free of tongue. Even so, it might have been so bad had not the magistrate brought up the subject of bandits. Are you concerned, Masanakor, at traveling straight into the territory of the bandits who haunt this land? We have here a king's deputy, but he is only one man, and is not able to destroy all them all single-handedly. The merchant rocked back and forth a little on his chair, very solemn-faced, striving to keep his eyes fixed on the magistrate. Oh, no, no, I don't worry about bandits. Really? Moel's bandits here have even been attacking outlying farmsteads. Any amount of wealth would be tempting to them. Masanakor continued to sit, rocking gently, forcing his eyes to stay wide. You think my train's not worth much? Got expensive cargo I have, but I cannot take care of it. But I can take care of it. Really? Frithor sounded doubtful. He had seen the few guards and drovers, none of them whom particularly inspired confidence. Really? Masanakor lowered his voice, but it was still plainly audible throughout the hall. I got a midge magic. That's what it is. A mish magic. Nobody tries to rob my train, or I sets my miss magic on them. Conrad sat looking down, noticed the merchant. Indeed. Come, friend Masanakor. I think you've drunk a little deeply tonight. Best you should find your bed. This was, of course, the wrong thing to say. Masanakor leaned over and gripped the magistrate's robe. Drunk, am I? Drunk? Too drunk to know what I'm talking about? Making big brags? I'll show you. Releasing the magistrate with such suddenness that Frithor almost fell over backwards, the merchant began dipping into the wallet at his belt. After several attempts, he pulled out a folded piece of parchment and began to unfold it. Those standing by said afterward that it had letters on it. Letters which seemed to have been written with a brush. He set one of the beer mugs in the center of the wooden table and began to speak. The words were in no language known to those in the inn, but they all felt a heavy, stifling heat. He pronounced the final words. Messenger pointed at the mug. There was a sudden flash, and a small charred spot marked the area where the mug had been. Massacre looked around. There! Said I had mish magic. Anybody attacks my train and I mish magic 'em. Just like that. And if I can miss magic that, not too drunk yet. So I'll have another, landlord. He did indeed have another, but his assistant, who knew best how to reason with him, persuaded him to go to his bed soon after. It was generally agreed that Messinacor and his magic paper would be a 9 days wonder in the neighborhood, with speculations on how it had been done and what it had cost him. The next day's events, however, made it more than a 9 days wonder, because Priam had a loose shoe. Ethan stayed in the town and spent most of the day around the blacksmith's forge, waiting for the man to get around to him. Late that evening, the man stepped into town. He wore the dress of the usual mule and had an arrow sticking out of his lower back. He managed to open the door of the inn before he fell, and there was a rush to look at him. After a little daring and useless chat, one of them he got down to bandaging his wound. The wound was not extremely deep, since the arrow had struck one of his ribs, but he had lost a good deal of blood, and while they were bandaging him, someone thought to summon Ethan, who arrived just as they were finishing. Shortly thereafter, the man woke again, and Ethan was there to ask questions. Bandits? We were ambushed. All dead. Who were ambushed? Massacre, Massacre's pack train. 10, 15 miles away. How many? 20, 25. They wanted his paper. His paper? His paper with the spell. One for arrows was for him. A moment later, I got mine and fell. I held my breath when they came to look us over, so they thought I was dead. I heard them talking. They took the mules. What they want was paper. What do you know of this paper? Not much. We got it from a magician, name of Rogue, at Withpavrius. Sorry, Raj? Rog? Rogi? Rogi? Rog. I'm gonna go with Rog. Sure. Yeah, Rog. Rogge. Rog. The weirdest spelling bee ever. Okay. Rog put the power into the writing so that all it was needed was to read the words. After 10 or 20 times, the power's gone. And it doesn't work unless someone puts the power in it again. Ethan leaned back and took a deep breath. And that do. Good thing that I'm reading chapter 11. Ethan did nothing immediately, since it seemed that nothing was to be gained by swift and rash action. He had authority to call help from the townsfolk, or few enough of them capable of helping, especially in the face of magic attacks. He sent a message to the magician Rog, Roche, Hogg, informing the situation and asking that he come to Alpha Breas to lend his assistance. The deputy mustered several young men, younger sons, and formed them into a guard, which he sent to drilling. Occasionally he put Tywell or Glass in charge of the training, though the two still grumbled a little about not seeing any action. Shortly after the story had begun to make its rounds, Athan was approached by Cyfrathor. By now the magistrate was used to having the deputy about, and had lost most of his awe. What do you plan to do about this here bandit and his magic paper, deputy? Not sitting around here, that much I know. This man Moel is a menace, and he must be dealt with. The more so now that he has this magic. And should I be aimlessly riding through the brush each and every day in hope of running across him accidentally? Well, perhaps not, but certainly there must be something that can be done. Yes, there are things to be done, and I'm doing most of them. But it seems useless, or worse, to go aimlessly about seeking a man who has a spell with which he can burn me down as soon as he sees me. Typhrathor departed, muttering to himself. For the first few days, the bandits seemed to be inactive. On the fourth day, following the taking of Mesnacor's paper, there was an attack on a lightly guarded pack train. No magic was used, but none seemed to be needed either. Two more outlying farms were plundered, but nothing spectacular happened. At last, the merchant with whom he had sent the message to Rog arrived back. He was medium tall, very broad, with a slight limp in his right leg, the souvenir of the recent wars, and a fingerlet of black hair that hung constantly over his right eye. Ethan could tell by the fellow's nervous expression that he had. What news? He said that neither had time nor the intention to come to meet you, deputy. He said the bandits were not his concern, and that he would leave you to deal with them. The merchant looked at Ethan as though expecting him to fly into a rage. The deputy merely nodded. After another 3 days, when people began to suspect that perhaps the bandit was unable to use Masnacor's paper, the panhandler came riding into town with on an exhausted pony, and when the man caught his breath, he began babbling about bandits and armies and dread lightning striking down all the train. It took a little time for Ethan to calm him down and make him talk sense, but the deputy finally discovered what had happened. We were just passing it. The guard an attack. Suddenly, a blast of fire struck down most of the guards. When I saw that, I cast myself onto a stampeding pony and let them carry me away. I, the, I got the pack free as we went to lighten I set the pack free as we went to lighten the load. After a bit, it seemed they weren't following me, so I let the beast slow down some, and here I am. It was clear to Ethan that the only thing to be done was to find Rog and convince him convince the magician to help. He informed Kyfrathor as to his intention. The magistrate was not happy with the situation. Magistrate, I feel it is necessary to go off to. Okay, hold on here. I have to fix some stuff here. Let me reread that. Okay. After a bit, it seemed they weren't following me, so I let the beast slow down some, and here I am. It was clear to Ethan that the only thing to be done was to go find Rog and convince the magician to help. He informed Hyfrithor as to his intention. The magistrate was not happy with the situation. Magistrate, I feel it necessary to go off to with Breas to see the magician who produced that magical paper. Hyfrithor frowned. You will go in town, then. I leave the two young men whom I have trained to assist me. They shall be in charge while I am gone. Hyfrithor was not impressed by the protection afforded by the two young men. Don't this, deputy. I don't like it myself, Hyfrithor, but my responsibility is to more than merely the town of Alphabreas. And if I leave things be without attempting to deal with this magical paper, there'll be more trouble than I care to think of. And if there's magic to be dealt with, I think it would be better to go see a magician. Hyfrithor, still obviously unhappy, nodded. I do not like this, deputy, he repeated. Ethan shrugged. It must be done. I will be back as soon as may be. Hyfrithor, seeing that there was no use arguing further, merely stood uneasily. With Abraeus, sorry, with Publius, seemed not to have suffered appreciably from the attacks of the Kimratha. Its streets were a bustle with people, its markets busy. Ethan finally accosted one old man who was loitering by a stall where a younger woman, apparently his daughter, was selling fowl. Old fellow, where do I find the inn of the Three Ducklings? The old man looked up at him with an unwelcoming expression on his face. It be in the older part of town, down where they be mostly layabouts and ruffians these days. No place for decent folk. Unfortunately, I have little choice. The oldster. Oldster? Oh boy. Okay. Uh-huh. You can tell my father was born in the 40s. The elderly gentleman nodded. Aye, that may be the way of it. Right enough. Ever since the war, this town be having more than its share of rogues and thieves. They say it be from the Kimratha destroying so many towns and villages that there be nowhere else for these to go. Aye, go down there, deputy, and do away with a lot of them. Make this town safe, as it were in my day. Nathan took his leave. It did not seem worthwhile to point out that doing away with the rogues and thieves was more a matter for the magistrates of the town than for a king's deputy. Ethan rode warily, though most of the attacking people in the poor. Nope. Let's try that again. Ethan rode warily, attacking any person wearing armor and a well-used sword. There were one or two who eyed Priyan a little enviously, but after glancing at Ethan, they turned away after easier pickings. The deputy tied his horse outside the inn and entered. The innkeeper, a large and none too tidy man, in a greasy apron, greeted him. What can I do for you, sir? Is the magician Rog here? The innkeeper jerked a thumb over his shoulder at the parlor. He be there, where he always be sorry, where he be always, oh, the morning, and it as it always, oh, the morning. No, I have business which will not wait. The innkeeper shrugged. If he if he turn you something small and slimy, don't be complaining me. And laughing at her as they had some joke, he went on about his work. Ethan continued into the parlor. Pardon me. The single occupant of that room was a robed and hooded figure in one particularly dim corner, hunched over the table, with a large earthenware mug in front of him. The mug, as Ethan saw when he approached the table, was empty. The deputy paused as he approached the bench across the table from the man. Are you the wizard rogue? Wizard Rog? Without looking up, the man said, Go away. It was spoken in a quiet tone of command, and there was something in the words which caused Ethan to begin to turn and leave. He caught himself just as his feet were moving and stood his ground. If you are Rog, I must speak with you. In the king's name. In the king's name, mocked the wizard. I do not wish to speak to you, in the king's name or other. Nevertheless, I will speak to you. The head came up, and the wizard looked at Ethan. He was a youngish man with sandy-colored hair and a face that looked as though it had been through privation and suffering, but lately had begun to put on more flesh. The eyes, which could be seen only as dim gleams in the shadow of his hood, stared unwinkingly at Ethan. Go away. It was easier this time on speaking to you. How then, if I were to speak a word and turn you into a toad or a spider or some such? Then I should have to. But would not perhaps this be too much trouble to avoid for simply having a few words with me? The wizard threw back his head and laughed. What is your name? I am Ethan, Ethanbraw's son, deputy of the king. And Ethanbraw's son, is not willing to be turned aside? Ethanbraw's son, has a task to do, with little enough aid from any quarter. There was a man, Masnakor, who bought a magical paper from you. The wizard halted him with a raised hand. It was not precisely bought. He stole it? No, not that either. We gambled, you see, and I wagered the paper. When I had no more money, I won twice, I lost once, and he took the paper in preference to the money. And now, if I read the situation right, he invested too much in his side of it. Correct. And now I require your help to deal with the man who has it now. Help? Rogue laughed bitterly. And to be a wizard, you see, is a process of learning to concentrate one's energies on the task at hand. Having served an apprenticeship with an older wizard and having learned as much as he could teach me at the time, I set out on a learning journey, a trip where I would attempt to learn from what I saw around me and use what magic I had learned in a way that would further my learning. I came to this inn one evening when a cold wind was blowing and rain was falling. The company was merry. The fishermen brought me a mug of fine ale. I was enjoying myself so hugely that I noticed when the ale became too much for me. Next thing I woke the next morning feeling much too miserable. Be woods, I could people. Oh my, sorry about that, people. Okay. Him. I allowed myself to stay one more day. That evening, however, there were people in the inn, enjoying themselves, telling stories, buying ale. I joined in the storytelling, bought some ale, and before too much longer, I realized I'd slipped out of that state of concentration which was necessary for all but the most simply of wizardly endeavors. I've been here for some time since. Every so often, I determine that I shall leave the next day. When that next day comes, I allow myself one last cup of ale before I leave. That cup leads to another, and before long, it is too late to leave that day. Though. How came it that you were able to make such a thing? I made it some time ago. A test for the magician to whom I was apprenticed, and thus I had it with me. At present, I doubt I could summon the. It would seem, said Ethan, that if you were removed from this inn, you might recover your abilities. And that is the problem, Ethan Braw's son. I have no desire to leave this inn. At least, not enough to force myself to walk out that door. And there's nothing I can say to convince you otherwise? Ethan asked, idly toying with the heavy earthenware mug on the table. Nothing, said Rog firmly. Then I had best be leaving, said the deputy, and stood, still idly toying with the mug. In a sudden movement, he brought it down heavily on the magician's head. Rog collapsed off his bench. With a little effort, Ethan managed to sling the magician over his shoulder and walked out of the parlor. The keeper gave him a startled look, and Ethan only long enough to ask, "Has he a horse?" "No." "We are off then." "Good. I would rather be far off from my premises before he regains his wits." Okay, I did not see that coming. Although I'm now beginning to like this story. Okay. And now, chapter 12. Ethan rode out of with Pebreus as quickly as he could. What with the added weight of the magician across his saddle, his intention was to be as far from the town as possible before Rog awoke. He was just trying to hit too hard when he felt the wizard stirring. He pulled Priyan to a halt, dug the rod of strength out of his saddlebag, and began to lift Rog down. As gently as possible, he laid Rog on the ground and knelt beside him, watching. After a moment, Rog's eyes opened and stared uncomprehendingly at the deputy. He groaned and closed his eyes again. Suddenly his expression changed, and his eyes shot open. Blazing in wrath, he raised a hand, pointing at Ethan, and the deputy let his hand fall on the wizard's shin. As Rog opened his mouth to speak, Ethan squeezed. With no experience regarding the rod, and not wishing to cause serious injury, he was careful to increase the pressure gradually. He was almost too breaking off in a gasp of pain. I am using a thing of magic here, and with it I could easily crush your bones. I would prefer not to do that, however. On the other hand, I have no wish to let you attempt a spell on me, even if your power is as weak as you claim. What do you say? Can we attempt to reach an agreement? He watched the wizard's eyes, saw a mix of anger and pain slowly fade. There was, however, a trace of resolution, which did not bode well for their future relationship. Come now, he continued. This is not a task for which I am recruiting you on the pain of punishment. If you succeed at all, there will be a reward of some sort. Certainly I tricked you to get you out of the inn, but I need your help rather desperately. Let us make an agreement. For a moment, there's in those eyes, truculence which was replaced by puzzled speculation, and suddenly by laughter. It was almost as though he was laughing at something ridiculous in himself. Will you allow me to sit up, Athenbrow's son? I find it difficult to strike a bargain lying on my back. Athen grinned back and extended a hand to help the wizard get up. Sit up. Sorry. Help the wizard sit up. When they got themselves settled more comfortably, Rog spoke. As I have mentioned, my powers are not what they were. Even with time and patience, it's not certain that they will return to their previous moderate extent. But at least you can give us advice. Oh, yes, I could do that. I merely wish you could understand where things stand. And there is another problem. Yes. For some time to come, perhaps forever, I shall have to be kept from drinking, perhaps even by force. You understand? Ethan had known men before to come to the point where they were unable to drink less than too much. He nodded. You wish me to watch you then? I do. You will understand that at the moment I am quite willing to forego ale and wine forever. As time goes on, however, I may well be unable to maintain that resolve. I understand. Good. Now to terms. For all his recent life of dispassion and more recent unconsciousness, drove a hard bargain. The eventual agreement meant, and if they succeeded, he would be well off, almost wealthy. When the bargaining was over and they had shaken hands on the eighth and asked, we began to bargain, you looked angry. Then suddenly you laughed. Why did you laugh just then? Frog cast his mind back, then smiled. It is part of being a wizard. One is always seeking after new or previously unknown things. I began to wonder just what sort of thing it was that allowed you to increase your strength, and where you'd come by it. The circumstances, when I became aware of what I was thinking, were so ridiculous as to leave me no other choice but to laugh at myself. But since we are speaking of it, and it did have something to do with that small white rod, did it not? Nathan laughed. It did indeed. A very good guess. Rog nodded. Wizards spend much time training themselves to notice such things. You held the rod in your left hand to be occupied unless another way. Simple enough, really. Okay, I'm not really sure. They set out shortly thereafter. Ethan urged Rog to ride Fran, and the wizard did. For a little while, and the wizard did for a little while, then got down and walked while Ethan rode, thus alternating riding and walking. They talked as they went. How long did you stay at the inn? About 6 weeks, I believe. And how did you pay? The host did not seem to like one to give free hospitality to anyone who might come by. Gambling some by from wizardly tasks. But I thought that your power was gone. Brock shook his head. All but the most simple of wizardly endeavors to recall. The making medicines for children, removing of warts, curing some of the simpler diseases of cattle, sheep, or hogs. People pay for such services, and though they pay little, one or two such services each day is a day's keep. Ethan nodded. Yes, I see. Of course, I could never get rich thus, and I continued to live thus. My powers would continue as I continued to live thus, my powers would continue to wane. I would at last be good for nothing but more difficult than mixing up potions from herbs, and my magic would be no more than a memory. You have rescued me, you see. He grinned as he spoke. Ethan grinned back. Do not be too grateful until we see what I've rescued you for. If both have blasted into cinders by the spell from that paper, you may not think it worth your thanks. I suppose not, but I wonder how it became known what Masnakor had. I demonstrated it for him outside after he had won it, and there was no one near us. How did a bandit discover that Masnakor had something of this sort in his possession, and how did he learn how to work it? Oh, that was simple enough. He was drunk and bragging in the inn in Alphabreus, and he demonstrated it himself. Everyone heard it. He stopped suddenly, realizing what he had said. Everyone heard it. The survivor of the train said that it was clear that the bandits knew what they wanted. Someone saw Masnakor's demonstration and passed the news on to Moel. He looked at Rage. Rage? Well, maybe it's Rage. I don't know. Honestly, I'm going to look that up. I'll have a better pronunciation on Monday. It seems very possible that Moel sends men or a man into town occasionally to learn what they can of merchant trains and the like. If I could recall who was in the inn that night, as local folk and Masnakor's people, it might prove useful. He attempted to recall the faces in the inn that night, but it was too long ago. And while he remembered features, he could not tell who was with which group, save for when some of Masnakor's people had caught his eye for some reason. Uh-huh. Give me one more second, guys. Sorry. Sorry. That was simple enough. He was drunk and bragging at the end. He attempted to recall the faces in the inn that night, but it was too long ago. And while he remembered features, he could not tell who was with which group, save for some of Mr. Core's people who had caught his eye for some reason, and some of the local folk with whom he was familiar. He shook his head rudely. Too many faces. But it might be well to keep an eye open. Someone is surely spying on behalf of Moel, and with a little luck, one might find out who he is. Rog nodded. If I might make a suggestion, tell this to no one but those who are certain you can trust. If it gets spread abroad generally, you will find that every stranger will be suspected, and old scores will be paid off by making accusations with little or no ground. Far more help if it were not carefully. All this made excellent sense to the deputy, who nodded, scowling, and trying to derive a means of uncovering bandit spies. They traveled on in silence for some time. Then Rog spoke again, a little diffidently. This rod, which increases your strength, might I ask, without seeming to pry, where you had it from? Where you got it from? There is a feeling about magical things, and this feels like nothing I've ever known before. Ethan roared with laughter. The curiosity of the wizard, is it? No, I do not think you pry too much. I'm sorry, no, I do not think you pry too much yet. But this tale should cause great trouble. You see, I performed a service once for the people of the hills, in return for which I was given the rod and two other items. They are useful, but have their own faults or drawbacks. So far, I've made use of each of them, but I would prefer not to make a habit of relying on them. Frog nodded his understanding. And now, chapter 13, if my sinuses will allow it. And I do apologize, everybody. Alpha Boreas was abuzz. It had become known that the deputy had gone to fetch the magician to deal with the bandit Moel. In the first full snowfall of the season, the deputy and a robed man were reported to be at the edge of the town. A goodly number of citizens went out to see just what sort of person this wizard was. Rog saw people lining the streets and turned to Ethan. Is there a parade coming through today? He asked, grinning. Ethan returned the grin. I believe there is, and we are the parade. Come now. They are expecting a wizard. Look like a wizard. How does a wizard look? Somewhat forbidding and mysterious, I suppose. But why do you ask me? It's you that are the wizard. Ron laughed. But there were disappointed murmurs in the crowd, and the general tone of which was, so is this a magician? He seems less than what he's advertised to be. Okay, give me one more second here. Sorry, I'm just super right now. I don't know why. That evening, after Ethan had used all his persuasive abilities to convince Kai Frather that it was indeed necessary to find temporary quarters for a wizard, as well as for a deputy, they rested. On their way to town, Rogad convinced Ethan that it would take some time to regain his powers, sufficiently to be any sort of match for Moel in the paper, but that he would attempt to plan protection against it. Ethan, realizing that it would do no good at all to let the local people know just what Rog's situation was, agreed to help in deception. He also agreed himself not to be pestering Rog about assistance for a reasonable length of time. About midnight, when everyone was asleep, Ethan suddenly woke to the sound of shouting. He had his sword in his hand and was out of his blankets before he was fully awake. A moment later, he was aware of what the noise was. Rog was sitting up in his own blankets, staring at something that Ethan could not see, and was shouting at it in a shrill voice. A moment later, he pointed his finger at it and shouted a strange word. Ethan heard a buzzing in his sound in his ears, but no effect was seen or heard. Rog continued to stare for a moment longer, then collapsed in sobs. Setting his sword aside, the deputy sat down beside him and tried to comfort him. Sayer the carpenter, whose turn it was to board the two, was wakened with his whole family by the noise. He stuck his thin face in. What is it? What is happening in here? His goat-like beard wagged, trying circumstances. No more than a nightmare, Sayer. Long traveling and exhaustion brought on such things. It is past now. Now go back to your bed. After he had gone, however, Ethan sat alone, wondering if he were expecting much from Rog. The wizard certainly did not look too capable at the moment. Pardon me. The worst of it was that the carpenter was a notorious gossip, which would mean more problems if too many tales were passed. Rog was going to have troubles enough regaining his powers without all the people expecting him to fail. In the morning, Rog woke first, but his movements woke Ethan. The wizard looked at the deputy. I had a bad night last night, did I not? So it seemed. Rog sighed. If I do not mistake his sword, our host will pass the word all over town before the day is out regarding the wizard they have hired. I fear so. And if you wish for advice, the only advice I can give is to ignore what they say and do what you can. It will be a long time to overcome the gossip of our carpenter, but it can be done. Rog sighed again. I fear again, as I said before, that you may have chosen the wrong wizard for this task. Perhaps so, but there were few wizards to choose from. You have not lost all your wizardly powers, and a little time of rest and study will make you good as new. Rog smiled. Oh, and perhaps we should go out to breakfast now, lest our host begin to spread the rumor that we are dead. After breakfast, however, Rog was able to repair his reputation somewhat. An old woman named Gwayor, 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 Gwayor came to see him. She was short and dumpy, with white hair, and her usual standard of excellence in all things was her late husband. She looked from one to the other of them, a little like a little bird, then spoke out boldly. You are the wizard? Rog bowed from where he sat. I am. May I help you? She chuckled at that. Come right to the point, don't you? My late husband always said that was a good thing in a man. Come to the point. No beating around the bush. Yes, there is something you can do for me. My chickens have stopped laying, and I can find no reason why. Ah, if I help you, will you be able to pay me for what it is? If you help me immediately, yes. After a few days, I'll have nothing to pay you with. Ah, Frog looked at Ethan. If you'll excuse us, deputy? Certainly. The two went off out, out the door, talking to each other about the possible causes for the chickens to stop laying. With Gwayor getting beginning a speech about her late husband and his views on the subject. Rog came back shortly, smiling, which was enough to inform Rathan of his success. Sayer did spread his stories around the town, but Gwayor refused to believe them. My chickens are laying again? That I know. And my husband always said that a man was known by his deeds, and he is certainly wizardly enough for me. Within the next few days, several other small problems were brought to the wizard by certain of the townspeople, and these problems were adequately handled for the most part. Rog, however, freely admitted to Ethan that he was as much a law as ever regarding how to deal with Moel. Moel did not make any overt movements for the next little while. Everyone held their breath, knowing that something was sure to happen, and nothing very cheerful. Sure enough, on the third day of the farmers on the outlying sorry, on the third day, one of the farmers from the outlying area reported something strange. The bandit Moel had come up to his farm in the middle of the day and demanded food. The way he put it was, "You are far from help here, and if you have a fine farm, we will leave you to farm it if you will agree to supply food for us when we request it. If you refuse, then we will have no recourse but to take everything you have immediately." And what did you do? Do? What was I to do with him and 30 armed men before me? And myself with only two working men, myself, a wife, and two young sons? I agreed. And if you tell me that it is against the king's law to give aid to such, then I will only say that he is close and the king, indeed even the king's deputy, is far away. If you can assure us, if you can assure me protection, which I think you cannot, I will tell the bandit to leave me alone. Otherwise, I will live as best I can. I promise you protection, and I do not condemn your living as you must. But see to it that all you do is give him the food he asks for. If you or your sons should take to sharing in his spoils, then I should have to notice it. Braithor, however, took a dimmer view and expressed his disapproval of the deputy's attitude. You are permitting, even encouraging, the flouting of the king's justice. No one should be allowed to give aid to the bandits with impunity. I ought to write the king himself. Ethan turned a steady look at the magistrate, who immediately quailed. And if I should hail this farmer to justice, and if I should hail this farmer to justice for what I could offer, the bandit would come again. And if he was refused, he would kill the family and loot the farm. And what would be gained? This way, we are at least aware to some degree where Morale is operating, and we'll be able to narrow our hunt. Tell me, Graytha, have you considered the more serious side of this mean? What the more serious side of what this means? Is there something more serious? Indeed, there is. Up to now, Moel has been raiding and stealing, looting farms and burning them. Now he has changed his attitude and is beginning to act like a king in his own right, demanding what amounts to taxes. If the time should come when he has sufficient force to demand food and money from the towns, matters may become more than a single deputy with limited authority can deal with. Is that all the reason why you should immediately discourage this farmer from paying those taxes? To what purpose? So that Moel should destroy his farm and family as a lesson to others? No, but we must track Moel down, by destroying them and ban before they grow too strong. Typewriter stood a moment in indecision, then walked away, obviously still unsatisfied. Rog watched him go. If Moel remains uncaught for too long, that one will give you great trouble. Yes, all the more reason for the two of us to seem more active, even though we may not be able to do much. We can find a horse. Are you willing to ride? And if I say I'm unwilling, will I be hit on the head with a mug once more? Guess I should agree at once. They grinned at each other, then set off in search of a horse. Within the hour, they were riding out of town, in the general direction of the farm where Moel had made his demands. It was a fairly long ride, and they had time to think carefully as they went. It seemed possible that Moel would expect that the word simply that word would certainly reach the deputy regarding his tactics. He might then decide to have the farm watched, in case the deputy came out with a force to seek him. If the force was too large, they could simply fade back into the hills and remain unseen. If it were small enough, they might essay they might essay to ambush and destroy it, to make their reputation more feared and make their practice of extortion easier. Therefore, instead of riding down casually into the farm, they circled around, coming up on the farther side and looking carefully for all places where a man or men might be left to keep watch. For all of that, they were unsuccessful. They heard the sound of a horse at a gallop, and though they attempted to catch him, their mounts were already tired, and the watcher's horse was well rested. Ethan pulled Priam to a halt, and Rog stopped beside him. What now? Asked the wizard. He'll be going off to inform the others that we've come, and knowing that there's only the two of us, they'll likely come seeking us. Nathan gnawed his lip briefly and scowled at the trail. Suddenly he grinned. How about if we ambush them? All two of us against a mere 10 or 20 of them? Is that fair? Fairer perhaps than you think. Remember the gifts that I have from the people of the hills? If I use them rightly, we might be a match for their Moel's bandits. Pardon me. Rog considered the matter. Perhaps if we rest our horses, then we'll be able to see just how many of them come against us. If they seem utterly too many, we can make a dash out to escape. If not, we can attempt to carry out our plan. Our plan? Your plan, rather. And despite the fact that you don't seem to have a cup to beat me over the head with, I will ask whether there's a part for me in your plan. Ethan hesitated. You're better than I to say what you're capable of. Do you think you can help? And if so, how? Rod considered for a moment. I am not capable of blasting them out of their saddles, but I think I might manage to confuse them with some illusions. That would help. I'm quite sure that it would. Will you need to make any special preparations? No, only to get down from my horse and spend a while composing myself as much as I am able. When they come, I shall be ready. The deputy nodded. I have a thing or two to make ready myself. What do you think? Suppose we wait for them here? The magician shrugged. As good as any place, I expect. It was about 2 hours later that they heard the horses approaching once more. About 10 from the sound. The two of them tethered their own mounts to a sturdy brush, and now the wizard stood in the clearing they had selected, lounging against a tree, while the deputy was standing beside a pile of medium-sized boulders he had gathered. The bandits trotted into the clearing and paused. There were 15 of them, the horses shaggy with their winter coats, but looking well fed. Ethan looked them over, but Moel was not among them. "Surrender," he called. "In the king's name." As much as he expected, they laughed. The stocky, unshaven man who led the band, sneered. "Surrender, is it?" He made a show of peering around the clearing. "You will call up all your armies if we do not?" "Do I need armies?" "Surrender. Give up your swords, or it will be the worse for you." The leader of the band drew a sword, and his fellows followed suit. "Aye, we'll give you our swords for certain. At 'em, lads." The bandits kicked their horses into a run, but Ethan stooped and picked up one of the rocks beside him and threw it. The leader squawked as it took him out of the saddle, but Ethan was already stooping for another stone. He cast it into what was rapidly becoming confusion. He noticed a change in the wizard. The wizard was beginning to swell and change color alarmingly. By the time Ethan picked up his third boulder, the wizard had grown to 3 times his size, and his neck had begun to extend, and he was green. As the rock was launched, Rog began to sprout wings and a long tail, while his face extended. He was becoming a truly impressive dragon. In the meantime, the bandits were losing their courage in the face of Ethan's barrage of rocks. For their horses, as well as the men, Rog's dragon was the last straw. The men turned their horses, who needed little urging, and fled. 5 of the bandits had been unhorsed, and 4 of those were dead. The 5th was in a bad way, but they did what they could for him. "I wonder," mused Rog, as they bandaged and splinted the bandit, "whether he'd prefer to die from his wounds or be saved for hanging." "I would not presume to say," answered Ethan, "but it seems we have little choice. His wounds are such that he might either live or die, and to leave him to death in agony would be a worse punishment than his crime deserves." Unsure, unsure of that last little part, but uh, okay, okay. I have to say, I do like the other character. It is fun. Anyway, this was super, super long, guys, and I appreciate everybody who stopped in to say hi and like listen to the story. I really appreciate it. That was yeah. So that's everything. I'm going to talk to everybody on Monday. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. So have a good night, everybody.